The beginning of the year has nothing to do with the Feast of Trumpets. That was invented by the rabbis who don't believe in Yeshua, in Jesus. The beginning of the biblical New Year starts at Exodus chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, this month is to be for you the first month of the year. So God, Yeshua, Jesus, decides when the beginning of the biblical year is. And
Shalom, my friends, and welcome to another video where we debunk silly messianic quote-unquote rabbis such as this individual here, Zev Porat. Is it true? Is Rosh Hashana a complete rabbinical fabrication that has no place in the Hebrew Bible? Or is Rosh Hashana completely at home with what the Tanakh teaches regarding the Feast of Trumpets or Yom Teruah or whatever you want to call it? Let's get into it right now. So, going into the book of Ezekiel, this is the reference that a lot of people don't realize, is that there is a reference to a Rosh Hashana. The question is, what is it referring to? We will unravel that mystery in this video. So, this is Ezekiel chapter 40, verse 1. It says, in the 25th year of our exile, the 14th year after the city had fallen, at the beginning of the year, Rosh Hashanah, that's where it describes Rosh Hashanah, at the beginning of the year, the 10th day of the month, on that very day, God's hand came upon me and brought me out there. So what is the context of this? This is where Ezekiel is getting the vision of what is understood to be the future third temple, right? So he experienced this on what was known as Rosh Hashana. There it is, Rosh Hashana, the first of the year. Now, what we want to explore is what is the significance of the 10th day of the month? When is the 10th day of the month a significant time for a change in the year? Well, if we go to the Torah itself, right? If we go to Leviticus chapter 25, we have a concept called the Jubilee year, or the Yovel, which happens after 7 Shmita cycles. So what is a Shmita cycle, you ask? Well, every 6 years, after the 6th year, there is a 7th year that the land is supposed to rest. So as it says in Leviticus chapter 25, verse 3, 6 years you may sow your field, and 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather in the field. But on the 7th year, the land shall have a Sabbath, a Shabbat, a complete rest, a Sabbath of Hashem, and you shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. So it's just like every, after 6 days, you have a 7th day of rest. So too, the land gets a 7th year of rest after 6 years of sowing. That is what the Shemitah year represents, or what is supposed to be done. Now, if you keep reading, it describes what is known as the Jubilee year, right? It says, you shall count off 70 weeks of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the period of 7 weeks of years gives you a total in 49 years. So on that 50th year after, so this is 7 7-year cycles, which equals 49. So then after 7 7-year cycles, which equals 49 years in total, on that 50th year, it says, then you shall sound the loud horn on the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month. What does that remind you of? Well, it says that in the 25th year of our exile, right? So that 25 would be in line with the year, it's 50 divided by 2 is 25. So you see that there's precedence for the math to math out on the 50th year, right? Assuming that the Yovel was in line with when the temple was destroyed, which is what is understood to be. You have a Yovel year, which is connected with the 10th of the Rosh, which is represented as the Rosh Hashana, the beginning of the year. So when would that make sense to be? Well, it says on this 10th day of the 7th month, known as Tishrei, right? When Yom Teruah begins, right? It says on that day of the month, the day of the 10th day, the day of atonement, 10 days after Yom Teruah, you shall have the horn sounded throughout the land, and you shall hallow the 50th year. This is the Yovel. You shall proclaim release throughout the land of all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee, a Yovel for you, and you, each of you shall return to your holding. Each of you shall return to your family, right? So the 50th year is that Yovel. So that's what's happening here. The beginning of that year is within the connection to the Shmita cycles, which are connected to the Yovel, which is being described here as the Rosh Hashana. Now, it doesn't explicitly say what month that's in, but we know that the Yovel is connected to the 7th month, right? Which is known as Tishrei, which is when Yom Teruah is said to happen, right? It says, this is in Numbers chapter 29, it says, in the 7th month, on the first day, there shall be a holy convocation for you, and you shall not perform any mundane work. It shall be a day of shofar sounding for you. So that's where we get this Yom Teruah from, right? That is what we know as Rosh Hashana, based on what is described here in Ezekiel. This isn't some rabbinic invention. This is what it's always been. So think about, and here's the beautiful thing too. Think about the gematria, how this works. You have every 7 years, right? On that 7th year, you have a Shmita, right? After 7 cycles of these 7 years, those 49 years, on that 50th year, you have a Jubilee. And every time this happens, it happens in the 7th month, which demonstrates the new year, the Rosh Hashana, which is being described right here in Ezekiel chapter 40, verse 1. Isn't that amazing? It is absolutely amazing. But if you're a Christian, you probably don't realize that this is something going on. You probably think, oh, well, this is just a bunch of rabbinic nonsense. It has nothing to do with what the Bible actually states. No, the opposite. It actually has everything to do with what the Bible states. And that is what Ezekiel was getting, this vision of the third temple, the future messianic age, on Yom HaKippurim, on the holiest day of the year. That makes sense. Well, it makes more sense to think that rabbis made this up and it has nothing to do with this. There's no significance to this 10th day of the month that clearly deals with the new year. What other evidence do you have? You think that every year in the month of Nisan, right? So it is true that what Zeb Porat was saying, that in the month of Nisan, that is a new year, but it's not the same as the new year described here in Ezekiel chapter 40. Now, those 7 years connect back to the 7 days of creation, or 6 days rather, but 7 days in a week, right? That relate to the story of the creation. And on the 7th day you rest, and on the 50th year after the 7 sevens you rest, and it's in the 7th month. It all has to go back to, it all goes back to creation, right? That the pattern of creation reflecting in God's image in that way. So that's where we get this idea of the new year in Tishrei, in the 7th month. So, and it all connects back to that creation. So moving on to more evidence, if you're still not convinced of this, right? Let's go to the book of Nehemiah, right? And it says, now all the people gathered as one to the square that was before the water gate, and they said to Ezra the scholar to bring the scroll, right, of the law of Moses, which the Lord had commanded Israel. And Ezra the priest brought the law before the congregation, both men and women, and all who could hear with understanding on the first day of the 7th month. Now, it's interesting here. Obviously, you see, the Rashi that he says that this refers to what is known as Rosh Hashana. But what's interesting is that it doesn't refer to this holiday as Yom Teruah in this passage. As you'll see, reading through this passage, it just says that they were all listening and they were attentive to hearing the reading of the Torah scroll, because this was the first time they really were together congregated since the, destruction of the first temple, because this was after the rebuilding of the second, right? And Ezra the scholar stood in the wooden tower that they made for the purpose there, and they stood, and all the people were reading from it, and he read in front of everybody, and he blessed the Lord, and they all said, Amen, Amen, and they prostrated themselves to the ground. And then it says, look at what he says to do. Nehemiah, and it says, and Ezra the priest, the scholar, and the Levites who caused the people to understand, and he said to the people, this day is holy to the Lord your God. He said, neither mourn nor weep, for all the people were weeping when they heard the words of the law, right? Because they realized they didn't understand that this was such a, important day for them to observe. And he said to them, go eat foods and drink sweet drinks and send portions to whoever has nothing prepared, for the day is holy to our Lord. And do not be sad, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. Now, if you look in the book, and that's what they did. It says, and then all the people did just that. They went to eat and drink, sweet foods and sweet drinks, right? And they did all these, giving to the poor and that sort of thing. If you look in the Hebrew Bible, right? If you look in the book of, in the Torah, where it describes in Numbers 29, it doesn't say to do any of that. It just says to offer up rams and to do these types of things, right? It doesn't say go give, sweet drinks and do these things. These are things that rabbinic Jews do today, right? We celebrate this day with a lot of joy and festivity, and we're, very mindful of how, it's more than just doing sacrifices, right? And that's why, of course, we don't have sacrifices today to do that. But in that tradition, we always say, have a sweet new year, right? So, Shana Tova Umetuka. So this isn't something that rabbis invented, unless you want to consider Ezra to be a rabbinic inventor, which, of course, we recognize Ezra HaSofar as one of the founders of rabbinic Judaism. So in a sense, I guess that's right. But you see the fact that this is an ancient tradition. It's not something that was made up or contrary to the Torah. No, not at all. And it says, here's what's really fascinating, is it says, look at the way the words are here. It says in that first month, right? In the first day of the 7th month, right? See that language? That's what was referring to as Rosh Hashana or Yom Teruah. Now check this out. Look at what it says down here. After he says to go eat sweet foods and do all that. Look at the way it's worded. It says on the second day. It doesn't say on the second day of the month. It just says on the second day. Rabbinic Jews to this day, even in the land of Israel, will celebrate the Yom Teruah, as is known in the Hebrew Bible, in the Torah, otherwise known as Rosh Hashana, for 2 days. And the reason for this, of course, is, if you're familiar with it, the moon sightings, and it was hard to know with the witnesses when the day started and when to actually celebrate the day. So it was instituted rabbinically to celebrate Rosh Hashanah for 2 days. And this is even done within the land of Israel to this very day, even though in the written Torah, it says it's 1 day, but you can see that this was celebrated. There's high implication here that they were celebrating Rosh Hashanah, not just for 1 day, but for 2 days, just as rabbinic Jews do today, right? And it says the heads of the fathers' houses and all the priests and the people, this is on the second day, and the Levites gathered to Ezra the scholar to understand the words of the Torah. And it says they found written in the Torah that the Lord had commanded by the hand of Moses of the children of Israel to dwell in booths in the festival of the 7th month, right? So that's referring to, of course, Sukkot, and that they should announce and proclaim it in all their cities, right? And then it talks about taking the 4 species together, as it is written, and to dwell in booths. And then it says, and all the people went forth and brought them and made booths for themselves, right? So here's what is fascinating about that. If you look at the language that is used, right? It says here on the second day, right? As I said. So you're probably thinking, on the second day, well, it doesn't say whether it's the second day of the month or if it's just the second day of the holiday. Yehuda, what are you even getting at? Well, here's what's interesting, because in the next chapter it says, on the 24th day of this month, Lachodesh, right? The Esrim, the Arba'a Lachodesh, Davka, specifically the month, the children of Israel gathered with fasting and sackcloth. Right? So after what was known as Shmini Atzeret, the end of Sukkot. So that's when they decided to fast, after that festive time, because remember, from Rosh Hashana all the way to the end of Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret, it's supposed to be a time of joy. Even Yom Kippur is a joyous holiday, right? Knowing that our sins are going to be forgiven. So there's a certain amount of joy there. So they they postponed their fast until after the entirety of, the high holidays were over, which included Sukkot. But going back to this, remember, it said on the second day of what? It doesn't say the second day of the month. It just says the second day, because at the beginning of the chapter, when it refers to this first day of the 7th month, it's referring to the first day of Rosh Hashana, also known as Yom Teruah. And then, when you see later on in the chapter, when it refers to that second day, that's referring to the second day of Rosh Hashana, which is also, of course, the second day of the month. But that's in contrast to the next part where it speaks about the 24th day of this month, which is Tishrei, right? Interesting that it left out of this month when it described the second day in the previous chapter. So that lends, once again, more credibility to the fact that the rabbis always had it right. We weren't making up stuff. When we say have a good, sweet new year, we're not referring to some made-up thing that rabbis made up. So when you have this Zev Purat fake rabbi going around telling you that rabbis made up the idea, and he's telling you to worship his false god and his false messiah known as Jesus, Yeshua, whatever you want to call him, you can call him out and say, no, Rosh Hashanah is right here in the Hebrew Bible, in the book of Ezekiel. It's associated with not just the Jubilee year, but also the Shemitah year. That's how the years were always counted, right? They weren't counted from Nisan. Nisan has its own unique, yes, there is a new year for sure with regards to what is described in the book of Shemot. But once again, we understand with regards to creation, the creation of the world, going back to that seven-day cycle, right? 6 days of work, the 7th day rest. 6 years of every 6 years, on that 7th year, the land gets a rest. Every 49 years, 7 sevens, you get a Jubilee year on that 50th year. Another Sabbath for, everyone gets free, and you have, once again, a Sabbath. So that is why, rabbinically, it has always been understood that Rosh Hashana, Yom Teruah, is associated with the birthday of creation. Either Adam Harishon or the creation of the world. It's a machloket, but ultimately it is connected to the creation of the world. And you can see Talmudically that this is the way it's been understood as well. And these are the things that you miss out on when you forego rabbinic Judaism and you simply try to relate it to, a false messiah and a false god known as Jesus, like Zev Purat over here. who completely misses the mark and tells lies about rabbinic Judaism, trying to tell us that this was some rabbinic invention, when in reality, Rosh Hashana was understood by Ezekiel. Rosh Hashana was understood by Nehemiah and Ezra. Rosh Hashana has always been understood as connection with the Shmita year, with the Yovel year. But no, you get sophomoric stupidity from people like this Zev Porat fellow, right? And if you want more information on how to prove the oral Torah as being in the Tanakh, also read Nehemiah chapter 10. I did a whole video on that relating to the buying and selling on Shabbat, how that was prohibited according to the Torah of Moses. I have the verses up right here. This is Nehemiah chapter 10. Show me in the Tanakh where, in the actual Torah itself. Show me in the Torah where it says that the only that you're not allowed to buy and sell on the Sabbath, right? Where does it say in the Torah that you're not allowed to buy and sell on the Sabbath? Well, according to this, Nehemiah chapter 10, verse 30, that is a Torah commandment commanded from the law of Moses. But you won't find it in the written Torah. But you will find it in the book of Nehemiah, sandwiched in between Torah commandments, including the Shemitah year, which we just read about. You see it right here. So that's important to recognize. Everybody, Shana Tova Umetuka. Have a wonderful Rosh Hashanah. Don't let any silly messianics try to convince you otherwise and try to tell you that there's no precedence for a new year in the year of Tishrei, the month of Tishrei, and that it's only about the month of Nisan. Yes, the month of Nisan is significant, and it certainly represents the new year, as many say, the new year of kings. However, the birth of the creation, the new year of creation, is in the month of Tishrei, as explicitly mentioned, right, in conjunction with what's going on in Ezekiel chapter 40, verse 1. Give me a better explanation, Christians, if you think you can compete with this. Anyway, I hope this video has been a blessing to you all. Shana Tova Umetuka. Have a wonderful Rosh Hashanah for all who celebrate. Yom Teruah, Rosh Hashanah, it's all the same. Shalom Aleichem.